next on AM 1480 WLEA, the Newsmaker Show. Here's Ryan O'Neill.
He's from Buffalo, New York. He's running for New York State Attorney General as a Republican. His name is Keith Wofford. Keith, thank you so much for joining us.
Hey, good morning. Great to hear from you.
Well, Keith Wofford, Republican State Attorney General candidate. So many things to cover. Let's start out with the Joe Percoco sentencing from last week. Joe Percoco sentenced to 6 years in prison. One of Governor Andrew Cuomo's aides sentenced on corruption, I believe in connection with the Buffalo Billion trial. Your thoughts, Keith Wofford?
Well, look, it's obviously the tip of the iceberg. I mean, we've seemed to have outsourced all of our law enforcement against corrupt public officials to the federal government instead of taking care of our business at home. I mean, look at the Percoco situation. You had $1 billion that was supposed to go to my hometown of Buffalo, which on its face you think is a pretty good thing. Everybody likes $1 billion to create jobs, but then they took $750 million and rigged it up in one contract for a political contributor, which kind of waters down any benefit that you might have gotten from that $1 billion. It's a real disappointment to the people back in my hometown of Buffalo. When I was a kid, you had some confidence that the government would actually do what it was supposed to do with your money. That was one of the things that really helped us growing up, was that people had that confidence. My dad got up at 4:30 in the morning every morning in Buffalo to go to his shift at the Chevy plant. And, we grew up working class. And so, you had certain baseline rules that you tried to live by. And one of those rules is that the government's not supposed to steal from the people. Government was not perfect, but it was in partnership with working class people like my parents who had as their priority helping their kids get ahead in life. You had the public, working in partnership with working class people, and you had a private sector that was able to provide jobs. And you have to have both of those things for working class people and middle class people to do well. And because of things like this Percoco trial, that dream and that pathway is whittling away, and that's part of the reason I'm running for Attorney General.
Republican controller candidate Jonathan Trichter was on the show here last week, and he spoke very highly of you and your legal skills and your background and education. If you were elected, Jonathan Trichter, and it's funny, I was just talking to a local resident who said whenever there's a Democrat in the governor's mansion, I vote for a Republican controller and vice versa, in order to have a sense of checks and balances, which I thought was an interesting comment. If you and Jonathan Trichter are in the controllers and attorney general's offices, what would happen then?
Well, it's going to get a lot better for New Yorkers, both taxpayers, and businesses really quickly. Because what we have now is nobody's keeping watch over anything. You have trial after trial after trial that's run by the federal government, and nobody from the state government's watching the people's money. If you have an attorney general who's independent and a controller who's independent of the governor, that's immediately going to change. And it's something we need. People are sick of working, paying taxes, trying to build businesses, but then the money goes into the system and the career politicians make it disappear, and people are tired of it. And you got to have someone, from the other side, who's there to potentially look out for the taxpayers' money. Regardless of who's in that governor's office, whoever is in the attorney general's office has to be independent. And that's one of the things I bring to this race. I've got an opponent who the governor picked. I've got an opponent whose ads are paid for by the governor. So you can guess how independent she's going to be. Certainly not as independent as me, who's been in the private sector on the taxpayer side slugging it out for the last 20 years.
The New York Daily News did what I would consider a very critical, you could call it a hit piece, article on you, Keith Wofford, saying that you hired some people with connections to Donald Trump, as if that's the end of the world. You hired some people with connections to the Trump campaign on your campaign. What would a Republican do? Who would he look to? And is this something that would demonize you, at least with the GOP voters? I doubt it. Your thoughts?
You know, here's what the voters care about. They care about their children's future. They care about where their money's going. They care about the fact that we've elected as Attorney General Democrat after Democrat after Democrat who's been a career politician and hasn't watched their money because they're trying to move up the ladder. So if there's someone who's on the ballot, regardless of party, who's going to fix this situation and stop people from getting ripped off and make it possible for people to control their lives a little better, they're going to vote for that person regardless of party, regardless of guilt by association, regardless of any of the political insider baloney. Regular folks don't have time for that anymore. They have time and desire to vote for somebody who's going to do something real in this seat and not just use it to punch their ticket and move up. And that's me.
Talking to Keith Wofford, the New York State Republican Attorney General candidate. Keith, wanted to get your thoughts on Eric Schneiderman, the former Attorney General who had to resign. Also, Barbara Underwood, who stepped in as acting Attorney General. Starting out with Eric Schneiderman.
So look, you know, the choice at stake for voters is, do they keep doing the same thing they've been doing, which is elect another career politician who wants to pal around with the other politicians and move up, or do they bring in someone fresh from the outside? And, you know, Schneiderman's biggest failing, while as far as being in office, I'm going to set aside his personal stuff, but his biggest failing in office was he was the usual mode, looking for the press release, looking for the easy kill, looking for the way to pal around with the politicians so he can move up. That didn't get the people anything, and it's going to continue to not get the people anything if we keep doing the same thing. So we have to vote for an insider for Attorney General, and that's me, someone who's not been part of the political system, doesn't have to pay off any favors, doesn't have to kiss any behinds.
See on WICZ, Fox 40 station, that you've promised to launch an investigation, if elected, launch an investigation into systematic state and local political corruption. And tell us about that.
Well, look, this corruption stuff's been a problem all over the state, and it's been going on for decades, and politicians keep promising to do something about it, and they keep not doing it. So, look, you've got, for example, situations in New York City. You've got a housing authority in New York that's got lead paint and a whole bunch of housing that's poisoning its own tenants. You know, you've got a housing authority in Buffalo where there are allegedly people who are in the authority buying rock salt and supplies at a markup, you know, even though they're affiliated with the company. So you have a call for an audit there. You have situations all over this state. In addition to Albany, we just got to get the politicians out of people's pockets, and we need to start targeting our efforts and prioritizing our resources to put things back in the right direction. And none of the politicians are willing to do it.
Looking at your website, a lot of interesting stories there on the news page. The Buffalo News has a story. It says, we asked the 5 candidates for state attorney general, would you investigate the diocese across New York State as Barbara Underwood has done?
You absolutely have to continue that investigation. You know, the allegations that have been made and the victims that have come forward, what has happened to them is an absolute tragedy. And they certainly have not gotten closure. The public, both the lay Catholics and the victims, has not gotten a real accounting for what's happened or what's potentially happened. For reasons of making sure that we pay homage to the unfortunate victims who have come forward after decades, and because we have to really get the house in order in terms of what's going on as a state from perspective of our criminal justice system. This investigation needs to happen, and when elected Attorney General, I would continue to pursue it. It's important to the victims, most importantly, first and foremost. It's important to the church as an institution and lay Catholics, and I think it's fair to say that it's important to us as a society.
Talking today on this Tuesday, September the 25th, with Keith Wofford, the Republican candidate for State Attorney General. What do you see the duties of Attorney General in New York State, and how has, Barbara Underwood done with that job since she took over for Eric Schneiderman?
Look, the Attorney General has a huge mandate, but three critical duties. First of all, the Attorney General has to get corruption under control. And as you know from what I've been saying, no one's been doing that because everybody's in bed with the politicians. Second thing the Attorney General has to do is that we have to stop beating up gratuitously on the business community in this state. There are plenty of states in this country that enforce the law but don't absolutely beat business over the head and beat them to death. And we, unfortunately, are a state that does. We have a couple of statutes that are frankly, way too broad, which means you have to use them with some discretion. You have to be careful with how you use them. You have to make sure that you're not inducing businesses to put their money elsewhere or leave, because that's costing us jobs, and we can't afford it as a state. There are just too many areas that need growth and need jobs in this state to have a lawyer sitting in Albany or in New York chasing away jobs. The third thing the Attorney General has to do is they have the duty to defend the state. When people decide to file a bunch of lawsuits against the state, the Attorney General defends them. So you've got to take care of those priorities, and you've got to have the capacity to run a big office. You know, the Attorney General's office has hundreds of lawyers. The office that I run in New York also has hundreds of lawyers and 700 employees. So you need someone not just with the temperament to go after the people who need to stop filching taxpayers' dough. You need someone who has the ability to defend the state in court, and you need someone who knows how to run a big office and set priorities. And I'm the only candidate in this race that meets all those criteria.
Talking with Keith Wofford, the New York State Republican Attorney General candidate. We're going to take a break, and we'll be back in just a moment. We'll get Keith Wofford's thoughts on his Democrat opponent. Stay with us.
Mullen Factory Direct Flooring declares Labor Day the kickoff of the warehouse clearance event. So what does that mean for you? You get quality name brand flooring at low prices while getting to choose from over 500,000 square feet of carpet, laminate, hardwood, and vinyl. The Mullen Factory Direct Flooring warehouse clearance event means it's time to shop and save right now for your next flooring project. 0% interest is available to qualified buyers, so take advantage of the warehouse clearance event going on right now at Mullen Factory Direct Flooring in Almond.
And meteorologist Rob Carolyn, it's rainy out there this morning. In fact, there's been reports of power outages in parts of the area.
Wow, that's interesting. I wonder if it's some residual effects of the high winds we had Friday, leaving some of those tree limbs a little damaged, and now we get some rain on the leaves. They get heavier and pulls them down. I'm wondering if that's what's gone on so far, Brian. I know we've had a bit of a breeze out of the southeast this morning. That's been showing up in the surface obs, but it's only been about 10, 15 miles an hour. Haven't seen anything too impressive, so I'm just wondering if it's after effects from Friday's storm. What we've got now, Brian, is low pressure moving from the Great Lakes towards Quebec. It's trying to move warm weather back into the region. Right now, temperatures across the area generally close to 60 or in the 50s, but to the south, we're seeing temperatures close to the 70, and that's that warmer weather as it works its way northward into the region. That's producing the rain. And we will see periods of rain and showers today. Should get to about 70 to 75. Winds will continue to pick up out of the south and southeast. Scattered showers and maybe a thunderstorm overnight, 65 to 70. Tomorrow, we stay unsettled. The cold front heads our way. Showers, thunderstorms, they'll be with us during the day. It'll be breezy, 70 to 75 tomorrow afternoon. Tomorrow night, partly to mostly cloudy, turning cooler behind the front. Lows will end up between 45 and 50. And a look ahead to Thursday has us turning partly sunny, 65. Weather should remain nice into Friday, Brian.
Back with Keith Wofford on the Newsmaker show. Your opponent, Democrat Tish James, who's running for Attorney General on the Democrat ticket, says that she's going to take on gun makers, going to take on the NRA. Did you have any thoughts on that? And your thoughts on Tish James as the Democrats' candidate for State Attorney General?
You know, I find it ironic that an advocacy organization is referred to Ms. James as a criminal organization, and then the government has guys being let off in jumpsuits every other month, and she doesn't do anything about it. I mean, I understand she says she's going to do something about it, but let's look at how not credible that is. I mean, nobody believes it. It's the same thing. Every 4 years, politician after politician after politician, we're going to clean it up, we're going to clean it up, we're going to clean it up. Guess what? They never do it because they're not independent. They got to get along with the other politicians. They got to move up in the system. They got to remember the people who brought them to the dance. So when those same types of people come again and say we're going to do something about corruption, the voters would be crazy to believe them.
Keith, on your bio page, and his website is Wofford4AG.com. That's WOFFORD, the number 4AG.com. He's running for state attorney general. Says you grew up in Buffalo, went to Harvard. Keith, when you look at the way the state is going, the direction it's going in, what do you come away with?
You know, where it's going in this state is just the wrong direction. You know, we've had this gradual decline, sometimes faster than others, over a series of decades, and it's because we just don't know how to treat the business community, right? We chase away jobs instead of creating them. We've got a political class that's pretty obstinate about what it takes to create jobs. You know, we've seen other states do it, but the direction of growth in jobs has been over the long term out of New York rather than in, and we've got to turn that around. And part of that is having a government that is both free and fair and is viewed by outsiders and by the community as free and fair. Right now we have neither. And so we've got to turn that around. And that starts, in my view, in the Attorney General's office.
Keith Wofford, how should the people listening, the listeners, the voters around here, how should they look at corruption in New York State?
Look, the voters in this election have to prioritize the corruption here in New York for one simple reason, which is it's the corruption here in New York that's costing them a fortune, man. You know, it's costing us in wasted time because we can't build a subway and we can't build a road. It's costing us an opportunity because when we do build something, it takes forever. It's costing us in terms of lost jobs because business can't trust the government here not to steal or mess up, and so they move their dollars elsewhere or they leave. And when businesses leave this state because of our government doing the wrong things, guess who pays those tax dollars that go away? You pay them and I pay them. So we've got to get this under control because the costs of corruption fall upon us. You know, the cost of that New York State corruption comes home to roost and lost time, lost money, lost opportunity every day for New Yorkers. And we've just got to stop putting up with it.
Down to the last 3 minutes or so, we've been talking with Keith Wofford, the Republican State Attorney General candidate. Were there any questions I did not ask Keith Wofford? Anything you wanted to bring up?
You know, what I wanted to bring up is that we're all really excited about this election. We actually think it's great that there's going to be high voter turnout this fall because what's driving high voter turnout is when voters have a choice. And this time, for once, the New York State voters have the ability to vote for an attorney general, that would be me, who is going to go in there, doesn't have ties to the political system, isn't going to run it as a political partisan office where people can get rid of their vendettas, and actually make sure that we prioritize the stuff that improves the families and the opportunity and the livelihood of people in New York. We need an attorney general who's working for the people rather than working for the politicians, and this time, the people will get a chance to vote for that. And frankly, isn't it about time that the voters had a choice for someone who would work for them?
His website is Wofford, W-O-F-F-O-R-D, the number 4AG.com. He's running for New York State Attorney General. Keith Wofford, Buffalo native, thank you so much for coming on.
Hey, thanks a lot. It was great. Look forward to coming back.